Hey guys, what's up? It's your boy T for 365 Horror, and this is a horror movie discovery channel. I am just here to put as many horror movies on your watch list as possible. And in today's video, we are going to be going over 15 reviews of the latest movies I've watched. So let's get into it right now. Now we are going to get into the video, but before we do, I've got to remind you guys to please like and subscribe if you like this content. Also, this video is best watched with the movie tracker. I like to use Letterboxd. It's just the easiest way to keep track of the movies that you've seen and want to see. Next, I want to touch on the availability of these titles, as I have personally went to each one of these services and verified that these movies are available. Now, if there's one thing that I can really say, it's please pay attention to the date that this video was released. Obviously, if it's been released months ago, then some of these movies may not be available, as they do change services. And lastly, these are just a review. That's right. Yeah, these are just my opinion. I just want to make sure that I get that clear. If you think a movie deserved a 9 and I only gave it a 7, then I'm not here to battle you. It's worth a 9 to you. It's worth a 7 to me. This is just another series where we can go over the movies I watched, and maybe you can get some ideas for movies for your watch list. I do want to say that I have tried to justify all my decisions, and that could help, right? So if I say I didn't like the movie because if it was too much of a slow burn, well, heck, maybe you love slow burns. If I say I love the movie because it had tons of gore and you don't like gore, well, then maybe the movie isn't as good as I said. So just use kind of my justifications as a loose metric on whether or not you want to see these movies way more than the score. And with that, let's get into 15 movies. Now, the first movie I watched was a 2024 comedy horror called Killer Body Count, and this movie's available on Tubi.
Do you know how to use this?
Yeah, I saw it on Stranger Things.
Oh.
Mistaken as a sex addict by her dad, Cammy is sent off to a remote religious treatment center where the other kids are being hunted by a killer. It is directed by Danishka Esterhazy. So the final score I gave Killer Body Count was a 5. And basically I thought that Killer Body Count was just a meh movie that had a couple of elements that really held it back from being decent. Of course, this movie being a comedy slasher, there was no real creeps or scares to speak of. When it did come to the gore, it had some gory kills for sure, and I did appreciate the kill variety. The first kill of the movie really sets this one up for how gory the movie's gonna be. Now, the acting and production budget for this one was fine, and I actually thought that this movie had a couple of really good points of raunchy humor, but overall, just as a movie, it came off a little immature. Now, while I didn't really hate the story, it definitely has some weird plot points that'll have you rolling your eyes. If you have nothing else to watch, then Killer Body Count is something for your watch list.
It all depends on Cammy's willingness to change.
Sexual immorality, impurity, and debauchery.
How did you know what I did last Thursday?
Next, we're going to take a look at a 2015 drama horror fantasy called The Witch, and this movie's available on Plex and VOD Digital.
Let us leave the wood.
A family in 1630s New England is torn apart by forces of witchcraft, black magic, and possession. It is directed by Robert Eggers. Now, the final score I gave The Witch was a 7, and I thought that The Witch was a good slow burn drama horror. Now, when it comes to the scares in this movie, you don't really get any, but what we do get is some light tension, and the only scares we get are maybe 1 or 2 jump scares. Now, the movie is a little bit light on the creeps as well, although it does a great job of really painting this very bleak picture, again, just of a very hard time period. And I found that a great musical score really added to the dark tone of this movie, and it even was shrill sometimes, and it actually would grate on your nerves and was unsettling in the right circumstances. Now, there's little gore in this movie, but honestly, as long as you're in it for the narrative-driven story that it is, it doesn't need it. Now, the characters in this movie are all really good, and they give credible performances. This being a drama horror, the movie definitely focuses more on character interaction, and the setup for the story is just so dark. But one thing that I find could really hold the movie back is its style of dialogue, which is just taken directly from the time period, so it does make some of it hard to understand. Now, to be completely honest, this is actually my second watch of the movie, and so knowing exactly what's going to happen really let me focus a little bit more on the dialogue, and it helped me kind of garner more of an understanding and put it together. Now, when it comes to the story of this movie, it's just really bleak. But it really is one of the shining points of the movie, as when you really put yourself into the kind of boots of these characters, you can just garner and get a feel for how hard life really would be. Knowing that a lot of the movie was taken from personal journals, diaries, and actual court accounts just kind of gives it more of an air of authenticity. If you're a fan of drama horrors and don't mind quite a slower burn, then I think The Witch is a great movie for your watch list.
What went we out into this wilderness to find? Leaving our country, kindred, our fathers' houses. For what? For the kingdom of God.
Next, we're going to take a look at another 2015 crime drama horror called The Green Room. And this movie is available on Plex, Prime Video, and VOD Digital.
It's fucking hard, man.
A punk rock band is forced to fight for survival after witnessing a murder at a neo-Nazi skinhead bar. It is directed by Jeremy Saulnier. Now, the final score that I gave Green Room was a 7, and I thought that this was a good, tense crime horror. Now, you don't get a bunch of supernatural creeps and scares, but you get some really tense moment in some of the movie's standoff scenes. Now, the gore isn't exactly buckets of gore, so it doesn't score high in that department, but the gore that we do see is pretty raw and visceral and painful, and it did make me wince a couple times. Now, I also found that a lot of the character acting was good, with a lot of the pain and panic being conveyed well. I also thought that the story and the setting, it definitely had a unique spin to it. I'd recommend Green Room for your watch list for sure.
We gotta go.
And we die.
The longer we wait, the surer that is.
Is that a pep talk? Just grab some shit, get ready to run.
Here we go.
The next movie we're going to take a look at is a 2013 horror sci-fi thriller named Final Prayer, and this movie's available on Tubi.
Final Prayer.
A team of Vatican investigators descend upon a church in a remote area to demystify the unusual happenings, but what they discover is more disturbing than they had first imagined. It is directed by Elliot Goldner. Now, the score that I gave Final Prayer was a 6, as it is a pretty decent found footage horror. It's definitely got some decent scares and some decent jump scares. Some of the jump scares were kind of cheap, but then some of them definitely were not. Now, the acting for this one was definitely good for a found footage, and I found that it was pretty eventful and had some decent action throughout. All in all, Final Prayer is definitely a decent found footage that is worth the watch.
The evil isn't inside the church.
Is that a voice?
It's underneath it.
Next movie we're going to take a look at is a 1985 horror mystery thriller called Friday the 13th 5: A New Beginning, and this movie is available on Shudder and VOD Digital.
If the memory of Jason still haunts you, you're not alone. Friday the 13th, Part 5, A New Beginning.
Still haunted by his past, Tommy Jarvis, who as a child killed Jason Voorhees, is sent to a secluded halfway house in the countryside, where the killing of a young man triggers a brutal series of murders in the area. It is directed by Danny Steinman. Now, unfortunately, the final score I had to give this one was a 3.5, as Friday the 13th 5: A New Beginning really didn't stand up to the test of time. Now, when it comes to the creeps and scares in this one, especially because the movie is so old, at this point, they're just non-existent. You do see most of the kills coming, and even the one or two kind of cat jump scares they had didn't even make me flinch. Now, when it came to the gore, it was practical, so it was not too bad, but it was almost interesting to see this style of filming where even the kills were kind of off screen. Now, don't get me wrong, it was definitely to reveal the kills to you later in gruesome ways, so it still had gore. I'm just not used to seeing that many off-screen kills, especially in what used to be a brutal slasher movie. I almost forgot that a lot of the older movies, especially slashers, really do resort to this tactic quite often. Now, the story for this one was pretty run-of-the-mill, except for you did get like kind of this Scooby-Doo type ending. And honestly, I'm sorry if that is a tiny bit of a spoiler, but the movie is 40 years old at this point. Now, it was really hard for me to comment on the acting of this one because, of course, it's super cheesy. But again, we're talking about a movie that's almost out of time at this point. And it only really didn't hold up because of today's standards. Now, all in all, I find Friday the 13th #5 is definitely a great historical watch. He is one of the OG GOAT icons, and it's always good to kind of rewatch the whole series. But honestly, that's the only reason why I would ever suggest to throw this on, and I would not throw this movie on in 2024, 2025 if I really wanted true entertainment.
Severe trauma at age 12. Brutal self-defense, murder of a psychopathic killer. Boy, they've given him every therapy they can think of. It's wonder his mind isn't fried with all the drugs they've given him.
Next movie we're going to take a look at is a 2018 drama horror mystery called Hereditary, and this movie's available on Netflix and VOD Digital.
I just don't want to put any more stress on my family.
A grieving family is haunted by tragic and disturbing occurrences. It is directed by Ari Aster. Now, I know this is a polarizing movie, and so the score that I'm going to give this one is in contention, but I did give this one an 8 because I do think that at its core, Hereditary is a great drama horror. Now, I've got to say that I've seen this movie before, but on this second watch, I found that I was able to gain like a lot more context on some of the movie. I also saw some things that I had kind of missed the first time. So honestly, I felt like I had more of an understanding of the overall plot, and the movie really did keep me just as intrigued as the first time I watched it. Now, while there's only just some kind of light scares throughout the movie, there's definitely some decent creeps in this film. Like, there are a couple of moments specifically in this movie where it did actually kind of send like a little bit of a shiver up my spine. Now, there really is only a few instances of gore, but what is there is brutal and done well. Now, the characters in this story is definitely where this movie shines, being a drama horror. The characters are all played extremely well, and the entire story just has this thick overtone of grief that you can really feel. Now, even though the story isn't 100% unique as an overall premise, I did still find that the way they kind of wove and told the story to be unconventional, and I actually really enjoyed it. The movie does this great job with its cinematography and its music to just give you this overall sense of dread, and you definitely feel it throughout. Now, I know that one of the main criticisms of this film is that it's definitely a slow burn, but I still love the movie because even in the slowness, I did find that the scenes all kind of had a point, and it did kind of keep you going with these weird horror happenings. All in all, if you like kind of the slower burn drama horrors, I think you're going to love this movie. Now, if you aren't a fan of a more drama, slower horror, then I would honestly suggest that you tread lightly. But me personally, I love this movie and it will end up in my collection.
Sometimes I swear I can feel them in the room.
Oh my God, what's that?
She isn't gone.
The next movie we're going to take a look at is a 2009 straight horror called Blood Night, The Legend of Mary Hatchet. And this movie is available on VOD Digital.
Blood Night, The Legend of Mary Hatchet.
A group of teenagers celebrating the anniversary of the death of a local axe murderer suddenly find themselves face to face with the realities of this haunting urban legend. It is directed by Frank Sabatella. Okay, so the final score that I gave Blood Night was a 5.5 because I found that Blood Night was a fun slasher with a quick, bloody start. Now, you get the Scream Queen Danielle Harris in this movie, and honestly, she's good, but the rest of the acting is pretty cheesy. Now, if you love horror movies with that kind of 90s, 2000s feel, you definitely get it in spades with this movie, even with its kind of overall offensive cringe humor. This is one movie that I'm actually surprised that they didn't have comedy as one of the subgenres, as I actually found it had quite a bit of comedy in it. Now, you do get a ton of TNA in this movie, along with a good variety of brutal, bloody kills with practical effects that are done well. If you're in the mood for something mindless and bloody, The Legend of Mary Hatchet is definitely a watchable movie for your watch list.
10 years ago, a small Long Island town was rocked by a series of gruesome murders. The killer became a legend.
Next movie we're going to take a look at is a 2014 adventure horror called Wrong Turn 6, Last Resort, and this movie's available on VOD Digital. An inheritance leads a young man and his friends to an abandoned resort inhabited by two sketchy caretakers and a clan of mutant cannibals. It is directed by Valerie Malev. Now, my final score that I gave Wrong Turn 6 Last Resort was just a 5 because this is a pretty meh movie. Now, the acting in the film isn't bad per se, it's just cheesy and a lot of the dialogue isn't good. Now, even though when it comes to gore, this movie had a quick bloody start, I found that it just took way too long to really get back to the meat of the movie. Now, in the meantime, if you like this, you are definitely treated with some kind of classic Circle of Friends humor and some good old TNA. Now, there is a lot of blood in this movie, and thank God that it's practical, because the elements that they do show you that are kind of CGI, they just weren't done well. Now, when the movie finally does get back to the thick of what it does best, I find that we definitely get some good gory kills, but overall the movie just kind of felt cheesy and hokey. Really, this is just another mediocre, mindless slasher with some decent kills, if that's your thing, for your watch list.
Nick, are you okay?
Next movie we're going to take a look at is a 2024 drama horror thriller called The Corpse Washer, and this movie is available on VOD Digital. Leela, a mortician, grapples with uncovering the truth behind her mother's mysterious deaths, while haunted by spirits and burdened by the weight of untold secrets. It is directed by Hadra Dang Ratu. Now, the final score that I gave The Corpse Washer was a 6.5 because I found The Corpse Washer was a decent to good movie that actually had some good creeps and scares. Now, it's a very unconventional mortician story, so you do get quite a bit of gore because they do end up showing you like a ton of dead bodies. It definitely is a decently unique story with well-acted characters. Unfortunately, by the end of the movie, I did find that it was just a little bit of a run-of-the-mill tale, and it did hold it back from breaking through that to that like 7 category where I would consider the movie to be good. Overall, The Corpse Washer is a decent to good movie with some good creeps and scares, so if you're in the mood for that and don't mind a foreign film, I would put it on your watch list. Next movie I took a look at was the 2014 comedy horror What We Do in Shadows, and this movie's available on VOD Digital.
What are we? Werewolves, not werewolves.
Viago, Deacon, and Vladislav are vampires who are struggling with the mundane aspects of modern life, like paying rent, keeping up with the chore wheel, trying to get into nightclubs, and overcoming flatmate conflicts. It is directed by Jermaine Clement and Taika Waititi. Now, the final score that I gave to What We Do in Shadows was a 6.5 because I thought that this was a decent to good vampire comedy movie. Now, you don't really get much when it comes to creeps and scares in this one, as it really is just a comedy movie on high. Now, honestly, because they're focused on more of a reality show, real world kind of aesthetic, you don't get much gore in this movie either. Story and characters is where this movie's going to shine for sure. Now, I'm sure for some of you that consider this movie as classic, the 6.5 is pretty low, but honestly, if you're a comedy horror fan, this movie easily is probably a 7+. It's got a great witty dialogue, and I did find a lot of the jokes were definitely smirk-worthy and competent. The characters in the film are really funny, and you can definitely tell that they filmed 125 hours of content, which they then shrunk down to 90 minutes, because in it I find that you just get some really authentically comedic moments. Now, where this one lacked for me, especially as a non-comedy horror lover, is actually that I felt that the runtime was quite long, even at 90 minutes. Now, although it had one of the most unique premises and settings I've ever seen for a vampire movie, I still felt that this kind of just documentary style kind of dragged on for about the last 30 minutes. Now, while it had a unique nature of being a mockumentary, I felt that that's kind of where it hurt the movie in the end, as it does feel like it just drags on and becomes mundane and directionless. Now, I know that seems like a harsh criticism, especially for a movie that's loved so much, but again, I'm just not a comedy horror lover, so I did find that some of the zaniness that the movie devolved into, I just didn't appreciate it much and it was lost on me. Now, if I'm going to be charitable, I'm going to have to say that if you are a comedy horror fan, that this movie is really funny and a must watch and definitely deserves a spot on your watch list.
It's been like this the whole time, Deacon, on dishes, and it still hasn't moved in 5 years.
You're a cool guy, but you're not pulling your weight in the flat.
Oh, I'm glad to hear that I'm cool.
The next movie we're going to take a look at is another 2024 drama horror mystery called Handling the Undead, and this movie's available on VOD Digital. On a hot summer day in Oslo, the dead mysteriously awaken, and 3 families are thrown into chaos when their deceased loved ones come back to them. Who are they, and what do they want? It is directed by Thea Vishtendal. Now, the final score that I gave Handling the Undead was a 6 because even though I found it only to be a decent movie, I think this is actually a good movie for those bleak horror lovers. Now, when it came to the scares in this movie, I didn't think that there were many to speak of, but I don't think it needs it because this is more of an emotional piece for sure. For creeps, again, I just find that this one was quite light on the creeps. Now, if dead people in general just creep you out, you do get a lot of that, so you might find that it kind of gets a little bit on you, but nothing that's going to make you scared to like go in the basement at night. Now, when it came to the gore in this film, although the film is light on gore, I did find that the dead bodies looked quite gross and visceral, and that part was pretty gory. Especially one of the main stories in the movie, which was the little boy Elias. Like every time his mother would just carry him, he just looked like so dead and stiff. He definitely was quite a gross part of the movie. Now, the characters and acting is probably where this movie is supposed to shine, and it does to a degree. Now, I really like the premise of this movie, and I just had a feeling that due to the subject matter, that we were going to be faced with some really weighty kind of character interactions and decisions, and it definitely provided that for us. Now, the story of this one really pulled me in because I already could foresee the character conflicts, and it's really easy to kind of just put myself in the situation. So even thinking about the movie, I was already having these inner conflicts as well. And I'm not sure if that ability to really put myself in these characters' shoes, because I have had like a very cherished loved one kind of pass away, I don't know if it ended up kind of giving me just a little bit more mileage out of the movie. Now, when it comes to the bleakness of this movie, it really is felt. And it's helped along through the despair and grief of the characters, which really is the linchpin of this movie. The only problem I found with it was when it came to the inner conflict and the interactions, I did want more. While the grief, despair, and depression was just played really good in the movie, I really just wanted them to kind of push the theme a little more. Now, overall, I think this is a good movie for fans of bleak, dark drama horror. But if you're not really in the mood for a slower burn or an emotional ride, then you might want to steer clear of this one. The next movie we're going to take a look at is a 2016 drama fantasy horror called The Monster, and this movie's available on VOD Digital. A mother and daughter must confront a terrifying monster when they break down on a deserted road. It is directed by Brian Bertino. Now, the final score that I gave The Monster was a 5.5 because I felt like it was a meh to decent creature feature. Now, it definitely earns that drama horror subgenre, as the main focus of the movie really is this tumultuous relationship between the mother and daughter, and that is really what they kind of put up front in this movie. Now, when it comes to the scares, the movie definitely isn't bad. You definitely get some jump scares and some moment of tension, but it just wasn't a lot. When it came to the creeps in this movie, I felt like it just really didn't have any, because creature features just don't tend to stick with me after I'm done watching the movie. Now, the creature, I think it was half kind of practical, half CGI, and because the first half of the movie really is in this heavy rain, the creature was kind of slimy and shiny and it looked all right, but it definitely kind of degraded the look of the creature over the movie. Now, the characters in this one were generally played well, even though there was quite a bit of dialogue that I just didn't love. Now, when it came to the story in this one, it wasn't bad, but it definitely wasn't unique, and some of the plot drivers were kind of meh and just had me a little bit confused. Now, the movie tried really hard to be this raw, gritty, kind of emotional mother-daughter tale, and while it did have some grittiness to it, I just didn't think it was fully effective. Like, it didn't fall flat, but it definitely limped through. All in all, the movie is a decent kind of slower burn creature feature, but I definitely wanted more, so you might want to kind of take that with you before you put this one on your watch list.
Let's go back to the car. Dogs don't got teeth like this.
The next movie we're going to take a look at is a 2022 comedy horror thriller named Deer Camp 86, and this movie's available on VOD Digital.
Birds pray.
In the fall of 1986, 6 knuckleheads from Detroit travel north to partake in an annual tradition of deer hunting, but something horrific has awakened and the hunters become the hunted. It is directed by L. Van Dyke Sabootson. Now, the final score that I gave Deer Camp 86 was actually a 6 because I found it to be a decent comedy horror. Now, the movie definitely has a slower start kill-wise, but at least it's propped up with some good toilet humor and some raunchy, offensive dialogue. Now, the movie itself, it isn't exactly swimming in gore, but it does have some decently gross parts. As the killing starts, this movie definitely gets more eventful, and it turns into almost kind of a full-blown action horror. I like the story, but I felt like the story and the ending was just okay. This is a pretty straightforward movie, so there's not much to say, but for a comedy horror, this one's definitely decent and worth the watch.
You boys were at the Peace Pipe last night, weren't you? Bartender was found murdered this morning. Too many of our girls go missing. Outsiders come up here and take more than venison.
Next movie we're going to take a look at is a 2015 horror mystery thriller called The Blackcoat's Daughter, and this movie's available on Prime Video and VOD Digital.
I mean, I just wish you could stay and see my performance. That's all.
During winter break, 2 students stay in an all-girls boarding school in the company of a terrifying presence. It is directed by Osgood Perkins. Now, the final score that I gave The Blackcoat's Daughter was a 6 because I found it to be a decent dark tale. Now, when it comes to creeps and scares, the movie didn't really have much in the way of scares, and it's pretty light on the creeps. The movie does have a couple smatterings of gore, but definitely nothing to write home about for the gorehounds. Now, in this movie, the cast is great, and I found that the character work was definitely done well. Even though this movie is definitely a slower burn, it has a good mystery, but it doesn't really tend to kick in till about the second half of the movie. Now, I found that in the end of this movie, you definitely had to do a little bit of processing, but the movie definitely isn't overly complex. Honestly, I did think the movie was dark, and I would give it a little bit of a better score, but I did just find it just to be a little bit too much of a slow burn at times. I found that The Blackcoat's Daughter is definitely worth the watch, but it's not a must-watch.
When you meet these people, do you say that she was murdered? Do you say that they had to do a blood test to see if her head matched the body?
The next movie we're going to take a look at is another 2024 drama history horror, and this movie's called The Devil's Bath, and it's available on VOD Digital. This film is set in Austria in the 18th century. Forests surround villages. Killing a baby gets a woman sentenced to death. Agnes readies for married life with her beloved, but her mind and heart grow heavy. A gloomy path alone, with evil thoughts arising. It is directed by Severin Fiala and Veronica Franz. Now, the final score that I actually gave The Devil's Bath was a 7.5 because I thought that this was a really good historical horror. Now, when it comes to this movie, you're definitely looking at a drama, so you're not going to get traditional creeps and scares, but there is just such a dark horror inherent with the time period. It just shows a really hard life, from everything from their work to their celebrations to their punishments to their relationships. It just does a really great job of portraying a dark, brutal time. Now, the movie isn't exactly super gory, but you do get some good historical gore. You get animal killings, you get some sacrifices, you definitely get some brutal, wince-worthy moments, but it's nothing like buckets of blood. Now, the characters in this movie are definitely a standout, with all the performances being believable. Now, one of the things that the main character does really well is she just does such a good job of playing this like depressed, exasperated, frustrated person who's just unhappy with herself and trapped in her position and time. It really made me feel for these people who just had this really hard life back in the day. Like, you definitely didn't get any mental health days or any kind of breaks. So it just really was brutal in that respect. I couldn't imagine living like that day after day, and since it's survival, you really get no respite or escape. Now, the story in this movie really does fit the time period perfect. And even though it's more of a slower burn, just the sheer brutal harshness of life and survival definitely keeps you invested and intrigued in the film. As every day of life in this movie is almost like a brutal struggle to survive, and it just was fascinating to watch. Plus, the white writing at the end of this movie really does hit, reminding you that you did just watch something historical and accurate. Now, even though this is a great movie, it still is a movie that I'm a little bit on the fence of owning, because sometimes it just really is a little too much of a slow burn. But honestly, if you don't mind a slow burn, you like drama horrors, and you don't mind kind of this older historical element, which is kind of a Viking element, so you do get some of the weird rituals and celebrations, I do think that this movie really is worth the watch.
Jetzt stehst auf und zückst die an.
Wie war das in Davisboot?
Well, guys, that's it for me. Thanks for watching the video, and if you did find a couple of gems for your watch list, please leave me a like and subscribe. Now, if I had to make a couple of picks this week, I think I'm going to be super boring, because I know people want... I do suggest that you watch movies like Green Room and some of the more kind of faster paced slashers, but I am going to be a boring dude. The first movie I'm going to pick off this list is definitely Hereditary, if you haven't seen it. Again, I know this is a polarizing movie. Some people just think it is the most boring movie ever made, but personally, I think that this movie is amazing. I just loved the horror elements of it. I thought it had such a good feeling of dread. I thought the musical score was good. The cinematography was good. I thought even some of the horror elements were actually scary and creepy. And I really did love kind of where the story went. I loved the ending. I just thought it was dark and good. And if I had to make another pick, again, I know I am just going to be super boring, but I really think you need to watch The Devil's Bath. I know this is a slow burn, another slow burn historical horror, kind of another art house movie, but I actually think that this one's really worth the watch. And if you can really get into the hard life, you are watching horror. Like, it's like, I wouldn't want to be there. Do you know what I mean? So I do think that you're watching something that does have a decent level of horrifying to it. Well, guys, again, that's going to be it for me. If you made it this far in the video, thank you so much. I appreciate you. I've got to get out of here, as I have got a ton of movies to watch. I hope you guys have been well and are taking care of yourselves, and I will see you guys in the next one. Peace.
Where are you going?
I'm going back to Detroit, where it's safe.